Hey guys, I'm going to be sharing a little bit about movement today, and we're going to talk about three different types of movement, which is the finger movement, muscular movement versus whole arm movement. And oftentimes I get questions from students about where the movement should be coming from when we're doing calligraphy. So I just want to touch upon the differences between the three, as well as hopefully demo a little bit more clearly when we're going to be using each of those movements. Okay, so the first is called the finger movement, and that is when our wrist is anchored to the desk, and you're not going to be moving or seeing any movements from this part, but all of the movement is going to be coming from our wrist up. And so just like it says in the name, finger movements, you'll see a lot of your fingers making the movements to create those strokes. And so when you're looking down at your hand, and if you look at this arm part here is stationary, the wrist is stationary, and you're just going to be moving your fingers. And so in copperplate calligraphy or pointed pen, because the X height is really small, you're going to be using some sort of finger movement because we need that kind of control when we're doing the shades of these strokes. And so usually for lowercase letters or even uppercase letter, or even every time we're going to be making the shade, I find that I am using a bit of finger movement because I need to use my fingers and the muscles here to be able to create those control and pressure and release for the strokes. Okay. But the difference between finger movement and muscular movement is that muscular movement, or you can call it the movement that is coming from your forearm muscle. And so when I'm setting up to write, I usually pivot my forearm muscle to the edge of the desk here. And so here is the edge of my desk, and here, the forearm muscle is right below your elbow, and I'm just gonna rest it right here on the desk. And this time, the movement is coming actually from my forearm muscle. So it's a lot greater in range because you're not only moving your fingers, but this time you're moving it from this point right here, your forearm muscle. So as you can see, now my range of motion is a lot greater when I'm using the forearm muscle. Okay, so just to demo one area where you can see whether or not you're using only finger or or your forearm muscle, I'm just going to do some oval drills. And so I'm using a Hunt 22 walnut ink, and I'm just going to be making these oval drills on my paper. Okay, so as you can see, I'm just lightly putting it on the paper. And take a look at my arm here, and I'm purposely not wearing a guard for this video because I want you guys to notice just my arm, because usually I wear a sock for a glove to prevent oils from my hand from getting into the paper, but just so you guys can see more clearly, I'm not going to be wearing a guard today. Okay, so here I'm doing my oval drill. So when I'm doing my oval drills, notice my hand and notice my arm here and how they're all moving in one unison. Okay, because when I'm doing these oval drills, I'm actually using my muscular movement. Okay, I'm not using my finger movement. If I was only using my finger movement, then this is what you would see. Okay, so the difference between that versus finger movement, remember, is when you're anchoring your wrist down and you're just moving your fingers. Okay, so if we were to do the oval drills with just moving fingers, this is going to be what you would see. Okay, and as you can see, there's not a lot of gliding, and it's really hard for me to create a smooth shape because I'm limited in my range of motion. Whereas when I'm using my forearm muscle, I am gliding along the side of my hand, along my pinky. I'm resting my ring finger on top of my pinky finger, and then my pinky finger, the side of this hand, is lightly grazing on top of this paper. Okay, so if I were to show you guys, here's the finger movement. And then here is the muscular movement. Okay, Okay, I find that you're able to achieve a lighter touch when you're focusing on the gliding motion and when the movement is coming from your forearm muscle. Okay, because you still have some degree of control because not only are you anchored here in your forearm muscle, but you do have the ability to rest your arm lightly on the desk. Okay, so now when we go into letters, okay, when we go into letters, you'll notice that when we're doing lowercase letters, I will be using a combined movement. And so that is, again, using the finger movement because I need that control and I need to use my fingers to make those shades. But I also want to be mindful to not only use finger, but combination of finger and muscular movement, because especially when we're doing things like uppercase letters or letters that go from your baseline to the top ascender line, your second ascender line, if you only use finger movements, you're pretty much straining your fingers and it creates a lot of fatigue. And, maybe you might not notice it if you're just doing it for a little bit. But if I'm working on a big project and I'm only going to be using finger movement, I find that I get tired more easily and my hand cramps up. Okay, so now I want to show you guys the difference between the two when you're working with letters. Okay, so when we're doing like letters that stay within the X height, it is going to be hard to see how you're using both your muscular movement as well as your finger movement. Okay. But the main goal here is not to anchor this wrist down so hard on the desk, but to keep it light enough so that you are more anchored here in your forearm muscle. We do letters like B that go to the second ascender line. Or even letters like G. Okay, so if I were just to use my finger movement for the letter G, this is what it would look like. I'm putting pressure here on my wrist. And I can feel my wrist tensing up as I go down to that baseline. I mean, not the baseline, the second descender line. Okay, so you can feel your hand and you can feel your arm. So if you feel like it's tensing up right here, that means that you're putting too much pressure on your wrist. So you just want to lighten up and make sure that you are, when you're doing combined movement, you are obviously using your fingers, but you don't want all of that pressure to be in this area. You want to make sure that you are still utilizing your muscles from your forearm muscle to make the longer strokes. So the third movement is the whole arm movement, and that's when I'm not anchoring my arm on the desk and I'm using pretty much my whole arm to make that movement on the paper. And I'm going to sense a lot of movement coming from my shoulder this time. And I rarely use whole arm movement for my particular work for copper plate because, again, the X height is pretty small and the letters, the range of motion that I need is not so wide. Even when I'm doing flourishing, I can pretty much do a lot of my flourishes using just the muscular movement coming from my forearm muscle. But the only time I will use whole arm movement is when I'm doing brush lettering. So I'm just going to demo that for you guys. So I'm just gonna write down here. So if I'm using a Zig Brushables brush pen. Let me get, okay, this one actually is really cool because it has the darker color on one side and then the lighter brush on the other hand. Okay, so with brush calligraphy, because it's on a bigger X height, I'm not gonna be staying within this part, but if I'm going to be using a much greater X height, as well as I have more room that I can work with, and a lot of my work consists of flourishes, so I will be using a whole arm movement where you will see no anchoring of my forearm muscle, but I'm going to be just gliding and along the side of my arm and my hand. Okay, so this is the kind of motion that you will see when we're talking about whole arm movement. And so I'm just gonna do one flourished capital letter. Okay. Okay, so as you can see, like if I anchored my wrist down for brush lettering, then it would be really hard for me to go down here because the range of motion from my fingers doesn't go from even the tip of this C to all the way down here to the bottom of this stroke. Okay, so that's why, especially with like bigger flourishes and bigger letters, I like to use more of a whole arm movement. Okay, let me try it with a different pen. Okay, so I'm not going to even pay attention to this X height. I'm just going to be using, let's see, if I do the letter E. Okay, so as you can see, my arm was continually moving in one motion, and my forearm muscle was not anchored on the desk, and that allowed me to have a greater range of motion, you know, from the top here to the bottom, and without having to like twist or put pressure on my hand. So hopefully this helped you guys to see the differences. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. But if not, I'll see you guys in the next video.